Welcome to the first Tikz and Pgfplots demo. I have an earlier video on why, when, and where you should use Tikz or Pgfplots. It's my favorite tool for making figures and plotting simple 2D data. And today we're going to just go through all the steps that I would do to make a plot that looks like this. Here we have 3 sets of data and a legend. So we'll start by uploading the data itself. I have it ready to go here. We just have to click upload. These are all the text files I'm going to use. One thing to note is sometimes you'll have like a different extension like .odt or .data, but if it's .txt you can actually see the numbers, whereas if you have a .dat file, let's say alright, well, this time it works, but sometimes it won't actually be able to preview the numbers. That could be because I loaded it as a text file first. Just something to note. And we'll see if I can make it do that. Right, so yeah, it can't preview extensions that come to it, and it's not TXT. Okay. So I'll call this, let's say you have a heading called Tutorial 1. I'm going to do a figure. It'll automatically assume you want to include graphics, but we don't want that in this case. Let's say below we have a plotting example. Data, Tikz. And we could say below in figure. And you can see it shows up as this label down here, so figure my label, and it'll automatically complete, and that's really handy because if you have multiple figures and you don't know which one you want to refer to right away, you can just right away just skim that drop down list as opposed to scrolling and finding it. All right, so in this case we want a Tikz picture environment. In that Tikz picture, because we're doing a plot, we want an axis. And the way it works is you start with square brackets with all little options you want on your plot. So some basic things would just be the X and Y axis labels. When we want to actually load our data, we use this add plot command, and we tell it we're going to get our data from a table. And here you put the path of that table, and it's useful to keep all your data in a folder, because then you can just use this, which means draw from the current folder, go to data, and let's plot. Let's start with friction. So friction.txt. caption, energy results. And there we have it. We have our X label, our Y label, and yeah. So this is the simplest version of the graph. But let's say you start adding the other data you want to look at. So there's your other data, friction, generator. It's pretty common to want to label it with the legend. If you read the Pgfplots manual, it'll give you various ways to do the legend, but actually, the way that I do it is not using the legend command here, which some places will tell you. Instead, the same way that you gave this figure a reference, you can give this plot a reference and say, I'm going to say this is F. Give this a label as G. And then you can actually refer to the axis as if it is a node in Tikz. So I can give it a name and call it a plot. And that's handy because now this whole plot we can access as a node. And what I mean by that is I'm going to create another node. It's going to be the legend. And I'm going to position that node at the plot in the upper left corner. So we'll compile it. If you haven't used Tikz before, you can't see the node. That's because I have to give it some text, for example. Let's say test. Here it is. And we want to position it well, and this node, we can give its anchor equals northeast as well, top right corner. Now it's a bit closer to where we want it because we want a legend to show up around here. And so instead of using the legend command, which can cause a lot of issues, we're just going to do a nice table. And this means have two columns. Each of those columns are left justified. That's what L means. And these AND symbols are what separates the columns. So data point 1 is going to be F. And just like we referred to a figure, we're going to refer to F. Then we're going to refer to G. And this means end the line. Compile that. Oh. Okay, so it just wanted me to close a bracket there. So now we have F and G. And you'll see it's still not right. It's floating here, that's fine, but let's say we want it to be a bit more visible. We can make the background white and give it borders that are black. So now we have this legend here, it's clearly visible. It covers up a bit of the graph, so we can fix that by saying I want the minimum to be 0. Of the graph, and the maximum to be, let's say, 1.6. And then typically, sometimes you'll want this legend to be a bit more offset. And the way you can do that is based on the calc package. And so now what I want to do is just move this legend a bit inward. See how this one's a bit floating? You can actually see it over top. Let's say we want that style. And the way you do that is you say, take your node that's now named legend, and you can do calculations on where it's located. So you say, I'm now doing a calculation, just as if you were to write an equation in the text. So to plot, say, that would write those as math. So now we're going to do math on the node itself. So I want to locate it at plot northeast, but I want to offset it a bit by, let's say, 1 millimeter in the x direction and 1 millimeter in the y direction. Compile. Now you can see it's offset a bit. So let's say you want to add our other two data files. This is going to be simulated and theoretical. And we'll just label that S and label this T. And why not make this blue and make this green, and then we can also add it to our table. So we've added to the legend, but we'll see, and this is a common problem that comes up when you use the PGF manual way to make a legend, is we have this big row, or sorry, this big set of rows, and it's using up a lot of white space. And there are several ways to make it oriented like this instead, where you have just 2 rows, and it's a bit more condensed. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to add 2 more columns, left and left. And then we're going to stack these next to each other. So now this is going to be 4 columns in total. F, its reference, which then plots the picture of it. G, its reference, and then that'll be the end of that whole row. We'll do the same thing here. So now it's set up like that. And let's say we wanted to make it centered instead. Then you would just place it at the north location of the plot. We don't need to do any calculations anymore. Well, pardon me, actually we do. Because instead, we're just going to offset it in the y direction, and we'll make its anchor north. So now it's as if the top of this box gets mapped to this one, and then it'll just offset by 1 millimeter. So recompile. Oh, that didn't work out. That's because of a bracket. There we go. Recompile. And there. Now it's looking a bit more like our other plot. Except we can see right now the blue line is completely covered by the green line. So one way to do that is we're going to make the green line dashed. Now we can see that the blue line is actually behind the green line. But it's pretty common for figures to be black and white, either because you printed it, or maybe you're aware that some people in your audience can't see color, so you want to add markers. So we'll look back at our reference graph. We want to make the red one have circles. The black one right in this one also has circles, but let's give it a different shape. So I want this to have a marker, and it's going to be a circle. And you can refer to Pgfplots manual on all the different marker types you can use. Here we're going to call this one a circle for the red line. For the black line, we're going to give it a triangle. This means fill in the triangle. Now we can see that's a triangle, G is a circle, and the solid dash lines are here. You can maybe give these shapes too, but it's kind of, the graph at least implies that the only two solid lines is this one here, where the simulated total energy and the total energy that's theoretically calculated are in agreement. All right, so we're not completely done yet. Let's say you want to refer to specifically this location. The way you would do that is place a node, but instead of putting a node here, where you're using all the commands relative to just Tikz, not Pgfplots, which is mostly concerned with what is in between these end axis and begin axis. So what we're going to do is create a node, but it has to be within the axis environment. So we'll say node. I'm going to call it C, and it's going to be at axis CS, which stands for current axis. So it does it in terms of the data. And if we look at our point, we want to put it at, that's 1 and that's 0.5. So 1 and 0.5. And we don't need any text because I'm going to use this to draw an arrow. So this is just a placeholder. So again, this one we're just going to place a bit to the right. We could have done a calculation like we did with the legend, but instead we're just going to eyeball it and say it's also at axis CS, but it's going to end at 2.5. And then outside of the axis environment, because we're going to be doing just normal Tikz drawing, right now I want to draw this arrow, and then I also want to make this node that says matched. So to do that, we refer to the manual and figure out that we have to use the draw command. want one end of the line that's going to be drawn to be a triangle. The angles on that triangle is going to be 45, and then the rest is just going to be a straight line. Then we're going to go from node C. We don't want it to coincide right with the plot, so we're going to say put it a little to the right, so C.east, and draw to, let's say, all the way to B.west. All right, it does not like what we've done. Let's try and figure out why. Oh, that's because I forgot we need 2 lines there. Give me a warning saying it wants me to put this in, but I have a feeling that's not going to change anything. All right, it's still giving us errors. Something about this it doesn't like. Oh, and the reason why is because I'm doing this outside of the Tikz picture. There we go. So triangle. So now we created this triangle here. And we want to label it. And by doing that, we can create a node. Let's give it its anchor equals west. Label at C. Sorry, at B to the right. Matched. Now we have a node that says matched, and it's pointing to this point. And that's useful for making labels a function of the actual data. And you can get more complicated with that and actually load in a point from a text file and make this a variable, which will come up in later videos. All right, so let's see if we're done. Not quite. We should label these axes for one. So let's call this, at least give it some units, because that's always good habit forming. Let's call that joules instead of energy. Oh, and lastly, you'll see this figure is above all the text. That would be our hypothetical paper or journal or whichever. And that's because in the figure, we need to give it this little argument that says HT. And that means draw it right here. And we're done. That's a basic plot in Tikz.